welcome to our plenary session number 3, the new realities of travel. It is with great pleasure to welcome CNN's foremost international business correspondent, Mr. Richard Quest, back on stage. Please give him a great round of applause.
Good morning. I always think day 2 is more interesting in many ways than day 1. Of course, the jet lag has set in. It's no longer just sheer physical exhaustion from multiple time zones. By this time, many of us are literally running on caffeine. And those at the back, don't think we're not aware of why you're at the back, hoping to nestle behind the carnations. Well, it won't work today. We are here for this part of the discussion and the debate to look at the future of travel and tourism and to start to bring together some of the ideas and the ways in which this disparate industry can be pulled together. One of the things I was particularly taken with yesterday with the students' presentations, and they were excellent presentations, but one of the things, and Amitabh brought it out perfectly in his comments, the way in which this industry has to pull together, usually unsuccessfully, frankly, so many disparate parts of the economy and make them work in some form of harmony. And that's why today, for this part of the proceedings, we're doing things a little bit differently. Amitabh will be coming up in just 1 second to set the parameters, but I want to explain to you how we've organized things today. These are the main areas that we believe are the future direction that the industry needs to look into. Obviously, aviation. Without the planes, people are going nowhere. Technology, crucial. But what does technology actually mean? Isn't that wonderful, that phrase, IT? Put IT before anything and you can become a consultant. We will determine what the role of IT is. Distribution and good tourism. If you don't distribute your product, no one will fill the planes that will arrive at the destination. If you don't have good tourism, we won't have an industry left. Demographics, the black art of any industry. And why do I say that? Because when the demographic gurus drill down into the mine of information, the rest of all this lot manages to work. But can we get them all to work together? Is it a zero-sum game? Are we attempting to do the impossible in that regard? That's what we're going to be talking about. But we need to set some parameters. Amitabh Kant needs absolutely no introduction from me. It would be silly to try and explain his huge role in the India tourism industry. You know it much better than I do. He is currently the managing director of the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. We know him better as Amitabh. Come up and join us. Amitabh. Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Amitabh, all yours.
Thank you, Richard. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Great pleasure to be here. Historical economists conjecture that China and India had about 60% of the global GDP share around 1600. With the onset of the Industrial Revolution and subsequently the shift from land areas to the seaboard of Europe, the share of both China and India dwindled very rapidly, and around 1900, their share had come to just around 4% of the global GDP. What we are witnessing today is in many ways a return of these ancient civilizations back to the center stage. In 2001, Jim O'Neill, who was an economist with Goldman Sachs, had forecasted that Brazil, Russia, India, and China, in his first report, he said that by 2040, these four countries will overtake G7 by 2040. He later revised it and said that by 2032, they will overtake G7. Just last month, Brazil overtook France and UK as the fifth largest economy in the world, and China overtook Japan. And the latest forecast by Goldman Sachs is that by 2018, BRICS would overtake G7. That's very fast rate of growth. IMF for 2011 has talked about the global economy growing at about 4.5%, but they say the BRICS economies will grow at about 8 to 9%. Now, what does this imply? This implies in many ways that a huge process of urbanization is taking place in both China and India. If you look at China, there are several new cities taking off. Suzhou, Lingang, Shenzhen, so many new cities. In many ways, China in the next 15 years will be creating cities which in population will be equivalent to the size of Western Europe. In India, I'm heading a corporation which is mandated to create 24 new cities by 2020. So this huge process of urbanization is leading to a huge rise of the urban middle classes. And some of you should read this new book, a very dazzling new book called Aerotropolis by a professor from North Carolina, John Casada, who says that in future, cities will actually be made around airports. And China, in many ways, has demonstrated this. While England debated about the third terminal for Heathrow, China went and created 45 new airports. And in the next 5 years, will create another 54 airports. And India is focusing on creating, India and all its states are focusing on creating 115 new airports. So airports will drive cities, and this will lead to a huge consumerism. And Napoleon had once said that let China sleep in deep slumber, because once it awakens, it will shake the world. And in many ways, China is truly shaking the world. 19.9 million cars bought last year. That's 70% more than what USA had bought. 70% more. In India, this huge rise of the mobile telephony and the phenomenal power of the mobile telephone. This, in many ways, will drive the global economy. One, the power of the mobile will drive the global economy. So you have vegetable vendors, you have garbage collectors, all using mobiles. 680 million mobiles in India, with just about 428 million households who have sanitation. 428 million households which have sanitation, but 680 million mobile telephones. The credit card usage growing at the rate of about 37 to 40%. Personal consumption growing at about 67% of GDP in India, 40% in China. Now with this huge growth, what does it imply for travel and tourism? In China and India, if you look at the BRIC countries, they comprise about close to about 50% of the global population. But if you look at China and India, just about 5 to 6% of their population have traveled abroad. If you look at the developed world, America, Europe, close to about 50 to 55% of the population have traveled abroad. So as you have wealth accumulation, as you have increased people crossing the middle classes, these people are going to travel, and they're going to travel domestically, they will travel internationally, they will discover new hotels, they will discover new cuisines, they will indulge in shopping, and you'll have a huge growth in terms of the demand for travel and tourism product, and no wonder the World Travel and Tourism Council in its last report has said that till 2018, China and India at 9.6% annualized real growth, and China at about 8.9 annualized real growth, will truly be it will be an Asian-led growth, and China and India will be the travel tigers of the world. So they will be, in many ways, driving the global economy. Now, it's not just the fact that these will be the Asian tigers and the economy of these two countries, but there'll be several other factors, several other features which will accelerate and speed up this process. And one of them is demographics. And to my mind, the aging of population in Europe and America is one of the most significant features of this century. Because the growth in Europe and America was brought about by what is broadly known as the baby boomers, born between 46 and 64, the Beatles generation, who brought in new lifestyles, new luxury cars, consumed about 74% of the skin products. They brought in totally new lifestyles, and all of them are retiring. 110 million people retiring in Europe, 83 million people retiring in Germany. If you have a situation where about 8,000 to 8,500 people are retiring in America and Germany, and you have a reverse scenario, India is passing through a window of demographic transition, which rarely ever happens in history. 70% of its population less than the age of 35. Very light dependency burden. Look at Egypt, another country. In 1955, the average age of people in Egypt was 44. Its mortality rate was 353 per thousand. Fast forward to 2010, the average age of Egyptians rise to 72. The mortality rate falls to 40. Almost half the population of Egypt is less than 35, and these are very angry young people. They're being governed by an 80-year-old man. They're very angry young people, and the demographics is going to configure the politics around the world. It's very important for us to realize that. So demographics is very critical because you have an older consumer in America, in Europe, and these people will have higher disposable income. They'll have more leisure. They will look for more authentic fulfillment. They will look for peace of mind, and you'll have to alter your product to cater to this demand of the older population. There will be a shortage of skilled workers, and this is a huge opportunity if you can create skilled workers from India and China to go and get these jobs there, and that will eventually lead to a huge amount of visiting friends and relatives there. So to my mind, demographics is very critical. But one of the key factors is what a researcher, a tourism researcher called Peter Adderhold, he looked at 10,000 people in the year 1984, and he asked them, what do you want to do when you go on a tourism holiday? And about 89% of them said that we want to go to a sun, sand, and sea destination. Some even added sex in that. But he looked at the same segment of the population, 10,000, upper end of the market, in 2008 and asked them, what do you want to do? And he concluded that the world had radically changed, and these were all alert, independent travelers. They all wanted to go to a destination and experience it the way it is. They wanted to look at the local nature, the local art, the local culture. And it's very important when we talk about good tourism to realize that this, by whatever ethical term you use, whether it's responsible, whether it's sustainable, whether it's ecotourism, but it's very important that mass tourism is in many ways has several devastating features. It damages local culture, it brings in uneven development, it devastates the lack of local, it demonstrates in many ways a lack of local participation, and it's very important that as tourism community, we focus on what Pata is today calling the good tourism, which many other people term it by something else. But it's important to focus on local art, local culture, and bring in sustainability in tourism if tourism has to survive as a product over the long range. I think technology, to my mind, will be a very critical feature. We've seen the huge onslaught of the internet, a growth of about 900% on online booking, and Fast Future says that about 64% of the booking will be done online by 2015. In 2007, for the first time in America, 51% of the people did their bookings online. And online travel will remain to be the #1 category online. There will be a huge, huge play by the online travel agencies. They will continue to gather momentum, and we've seen this demonstrated by young entrepreneurs like Deep Kalra, who's sitting here. And many of these people, when I was in school and college, I had to go and wait for 3 hours to get a ticket from Indian Airlines at their counter. This all changed with these young entrepreneurs coming in. When I was in school and college, it used to require a ministerial recommendation to get a mobile phone, to get a telephone, fixed telephone connection. There was an 8-year waiting line. To get a trunk call, to talk to another place, it used to take 2 hours, and then if there was a death or a tragedy, you had to do a lightning call, which was 20 times higher charge. All this has radically changed with the coming in of the mobile, and the mobile will play a very, very dominant role. And the mobile will lead to planning anytime, anywhere. It will lead to a convergence of social media, search engines, and the mobile telephony at one place. And this mobile will in many ways become the key driver of travel and tourism in the coming years. To my mind, there will be a huge onslaught on the global distribution systems as several websites, several suppliers ramp up their own websites, and I foresee a huge play on marketing through social media. We've just had a big anti-corruption movement in India, and the whole movement, let me tell you, was led by social network sites, Facebook, Twitter. It clearly demonstrated that there's a changed demographic, there's a younger India, and the social media is going to drive momentum. And the social media, whether we like it or not, Facebook, Twitter, you can't reverse that process, they will be driving travel and tourism in many ways. But that will be combined with search engines in a big way. So the role of technology is very critical to my mind, and the role of technology becomes very critical largely to my mind because we've seen the carbon emissions from the travel tourism sector. They demonstrate about 5% of the total carbon emissions come from the travel tourism sector, out of which 75% come from the transport sector and a very substantial segment from the airline sector. And I think over the years, you'll see the airline sector making very rapid advancement in terms of reaching carbon neutral growth. This is a very difficult and a very challenging task, but you'll see technological breakthrough in airlines reaching carbon neutrality over a long period of time. We've seen technological growth. We've seen the huge Airbus Flying Fortress taking 555 people, going up to, in subsequent years, going up to about 800 people, changing the whole dynamics of travel. We'll see the Boeing's Dreamliner emerging with its far more fuel efficient, bigger overhead cabins, point-to-point connections. And yesterday we heard this fascinating discussion on space tourism, and many of you, the younger generation, will probably celebrate their honeymoons in outer space in subsequent years. But there will be a huge change, and this will lead to traveling at much faster speeds with lower fuel consumption. And faster speed, lower fuel consumption will lead to the genuine coming of age of the low-cost carrier. And the low-cost carrier, the market will be severely divided between the low-cost carrier and the upper end of the market carriers. So it's a very fascinating scenario. We see changes in terms of the lifestyles. We see changing in terms of the rise of new destinations, we see the use of technology. But one of the key issues to my mind on which is very important to lay focus on, and that's the human resources. The human resource development from the travel and tourism sector is very important because UNWTO is talking about 1.56 billion people by travel and tourists by 2020, 1.56 billion. And the domestic tourism will be 4 to 5 times of that. And is the travel industry prepared in terms of human resource skills? I doubt so. Normally, the thumb of the rule is that for the travel industry's human resources skills, you require about 30% managers, and you require about 70% skill and skilled operating class workers. If you look at the PATA countries across the board, you'll find that we're actually producing 78% managers and only 22% skilled workers. 78% managers and 22% skilled workers. And I think it's very important to reverse this whole process because you'll only have managers and you won't have skilled workers across the board. It's also very important to realize as this whole change, the whole radical world changes radically, and this Chinese and Indian travelers travel much like the Americans started traveling in 50s and the Japanese in 70s and the Koreans in 80s. Large volumes of Chinese and Indians will travel. And this is demonstrated because the latest Visit Britain survey says that in UK, the Indian travelers spending £792 a week outspend the Americans at £710 a week because the new rich are big spenders in many ways. And it's very important to realize that for many years, these phenomenal institutes in Switzerland, hospitality institutes at Lausanne and so on, were designed for European travelers. And they will have to re-alter their course curriculum. They will have to re-alter to change to the requirements, the taste, and the needs of the Chinese and the Indian travelers. And they can be, let me tell you, they can be a difficult lot. So you have to cater to them. And secondly, to my mind, it also provides a huge opportunity for China and India to bring skilled workers, managers to manage, because the Four Seasons of the world, Ritz-Carlton of the world, were all catering to European travelers till now. But as wealth is created in this part of the world, the travelers from this part of the world will have to be managed by managers from this part of the world to cater to their taste and requirement and needs. And that requires the Four Seasons and the Ritz-Carltons of the world to look at managers from China and India. And for many years, you had Taj and Oberoi hiring expatriate managers. So all the best chains in China and India had expatriate managers. And probably you'll see a reversal of the process. So ladies and gentlemen, technology, aviation, ecotourism, good tourism, demographics are going to bring in radical changes. These will be radical changes rarely ever seen in the history, and it would require all the vision, all the determination, and all the foresight and creativity of PATA and its members to overcome these challenges. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Just a minute. Just a minute. One thing I wasn't sure about as I listened to you speaking. Yeah, get back in the middle.
This guy is a big one at grilling. I'm not on CNN right now.
No, it's worse. One thing I'm not sure about, having listened to you speak just then, are you optimistic?
I'm extremely optimistic.
Didn't sound it.
No, I'm extremely optimistic. There are a lot of changes. It's very necessary. Tourism is going to be, it's a highly resilient sector. It's one of the most dynamic sector. It'll change. It'll carry its march on relentlessly. And it will continue to create immense employment. In fact, it'll become the key driver of growth and of employment in China and India. But very important for us to make several changes mid-course.
How much damage do you think we will do before we get it right?
I laid a little emphasis on this damage which arises from mass tourism. And I think it does immense damage. I've been Secretary Tourism of a state like Kerala, where mass tourism devastated Kovalam as a beach. It led to encroachments, it led to illegal construction, it led to tourists coming in and spending £8 a night when it was worth about £300 a night. So I'm against low-value tourism. I'm fairly elitist in my approach, and I think there's a need to focus on local art, local culture, focus on the authenticity of experience.
Who should we give the hardest time to today? Aviation, technology, distribution, good tourism, or demographics?
You're going to give a hard time to all of them.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I quite agree. Thank you very much, Amitabh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not entirely fair, but perhaps a little bit true. The ground has been beautifully laid by Amitabh there, and now we need our players to get involved in digging up the dirt. In no particular order, other than that's how they've come up on my pieces of paper. Let's first of all have the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Cunard.com, Fritz Demnopoulos. Where are you, Fritz? You take your technology. So you take your seat under technology. Dong Lee, the Vice President, International Division from Union Pay. I promise you, this is one of the most challenging panels I've ever had to moderate, simply by virtue of the demographics within it. Deep Kalra, the owner and founder of Make My Trip India. Oops. Dr. Clint Laurent, the owner and founder of Global Demographics. Zhu Jiwei, the president, Mount Huangshan Tourism Development Company Limited. Michael Maple, the executive director of the Boeing Corporation. Dr. Matthew McDougall, mathematician, I hasten to add, in case anybody thinks he got a bad back, the Group Chief Executive Officer and Executive Chairman of Sinotech. And finally, but certainly not least, it's just the way it came upon the piece of paper, the Chief Exec of Air Asia X Azran. On your tables, you have the cues if you have a question. If you're at the back, you might want to come a little bit nearer to the forward, because you'll be able to hear a lot easier. Let's start with each of you giving us a slight overview of what you believe is your area of expertise. We're going to start with demographics, because to some extent that is where it's key to begin. What, to you, do you want us to focus on?
Okay, well, I specialize in demographics, and particularly forecasting of demographics. And I would like you to perhaps just stop and think about things a little bit more outside the box. Asia is not spelt C-H-I-N-A, and in actual fact, India and China are only 7% of the world's total spend on recreation. A lot of money is spent elsewhere, and it's actually a faster growing market. So think outside the box. Yes, China and India are growing rapidly. Yes, there's a huge opportunity, but there are other market segments which are much bigger, much faster growing, which you should also think about. So think beyond China and India would be my key message.
UnionPay is a national brand. It's on the way to become international. Only 8-year history. From a short 8-year history, we can see a big migration of outbound tourists from coastal cities to innerland, from group tourists to individual tourists, from shopping to leisure.
As we look at the demographic trend, what do you think is going to be the core trend to keep an eye out for?
Middle income class rise.
Middle income?
Middle income class.
Right, but if the middle income class is going to be the growth area, they won't be spending as much as the high income growth.
Well, you got to, first of all, middle income is a very difficult term. What is it?
What is it?
Yeah.
It is roughly in Chinese standard, it's roughly a family of three, with both couples working, making annual income roughly about anywhere between 200,000 RMB to 500 RMB.
Yeah, but 200,000 RMB per annum is about 2% of the households. I mean, let's face it, 90,000 RMB is when car ownership starts and overseas travel starts. That's 20 million households in all of China that meet that criteria at the moment. Now, the good news is it triples in the next 10 years. It gets up to around about 90 million households, so huge growth. But by world standards, that's $15,000 US. I mean, it's an important market, they spend money, but it's, you know, a limited amount
But
to spend.
so there's going to be more people traveling but not spending as much.
Not spending as much, no.
That's right, correct. Even though we only have 8-year history, for the first 5 years, the average per car transaction on our network was increasing. However, for the past 3 years, the average transaction per card has been stabilizing,
Right.
meaning more people coming out of spending.
More people traveling but not spending as much. What does that do for you?
Well, you know, when Amitabh mentions that trends like distribution, Asia is going to reach 65% online. Today, we're already at 93% direct online. When you say Asia is the future, today Asia already is the largest market, right? So it's not happening tomorrow, it's already happening today. Even in the aviation context, we're no longer following the Europeans and the Americans. Aviation breakthroughs in low-cost long haul is happening here in Asia Pacific.
Hang on. You say you're not following the Europeans or the Americans. What are you doing differently? What's different from what you're doing versus what they're doing?
Well, I think they've got this mindset that, you know, Europe is the European Union. You can fly from London to Istanbul and Athens in a short, small plane, and so they're very comfortable with the Ryanairs and EasyJet model. Asia is very different, right? If you were to limit yourself to the range of a narrow-body aircraft, you're going to miss out on connecting North Asia to Southeast Asia, India to Australia. This is a very different geographic landscape, and the potential of connecting these big regions is immense, and we're barely scratching the surface.
I don't see the difference yet.
Sorry?
The distances are the same.
No, the distance is much, much bigger here than it is in Europe or in America, where, you know, you can easily cover all of the EU within a small, narrow context, and that's why the business models are catered to a European model or the American
Yeah, but
model.
how does that change the way you change your model? You just use a different plane, you just use a different pricing model, you use a different model for aircraft utilization. How does it actually change the model?
Well, it changes because the utilization patterns are different. The focus on fuel consumption is different. The context of operating within multiple geographies, political landscapes is different.
Making planes, you all make the same aluminium tubes, give or take. There's not a huge difference between the tubes that you make and your principal competitors.
We'll agree to disagree.
Bob Crandall once famously said all airlines fly pretty much the same metal tubes.
Well, the Dreamliner is a composite airplane,
Right.
an electric airplane, so it's a lot different, which leads to Ron's point that the economics are so superior. So remember, like with the new technology, there's a couple things we're trying to do. One, we're trying to give more productivity. That means you've got to get more flying hours out of the airplane, true? So that means you've got to have better maintenance programs, you've got to have better flight crew training programs, you have to, in essence, have new technologies that support the actual airplane itself, which brings up one of the major issues for Asia Pacific. It's all about the infrastructure that's necessary to support this growth. So if you think about it in round numbers, that today there's approximately 1,000 twin aisles. In 20 years, there'll be 3,000. Single aisles is around 3,000. There will be 8,000. Now that requires over 126,000 new pilots to be trained and over 250,000 mechanics to be trained. So the fundamental infrastructure that needs to be in place for all this to happen is pretty important that we get that right.
Which brings us straight away to you, sir. The fundamental infrastructure which needs to happen, the growth What does that do to sustainable tourism in your view?
可持续旅游主要是体现在一个理念上。这个现在呢，我们提倡低碳旅游、绿色旅游、生态旅游、可持续旅游。这次呢，我们提出一个新的概念，叫善行旅游。善行旅游的核心呢，就是可持续旅游。善行旅游，它是在提倡经济的这个叫多元化价值，还有这个它的这种高效能运作，还有这个是传承历史文化和创新未来的一个理由。
But the sheer numbers that these gentlemen are talking about, and the vast increase that's taking place, is it possible to do this sustainably?
这个应该是这样理解，这些数字从表面上来看，能够增长，能够保持，或者是能够预测可持续增长。但是可持续增长的背后，还有一些更重要的因素，比如说环境的因素，比如说生态环境的因素，旅游环境的因素，还有政策的因素等等，包括一些不可预见的因素，这些都是构成旅游可持续发展的重要方面。
All right. In all of this, we won't get very far if there isn't a necessary element of getting the product to the consumer in the first place so that they can make their judgment.
Absolutely. So my focus today is going to be on ensuring that you won't bite my head off, so I say things which are safe and non-controversial. No, just kidding. I think after Amitabh's just phenomenal speech, I've heard him speak maybe 20 times. And each time he's getting better, so fantastic there. I'd like to focus on how the online medium, the internet in particular, is going to help go beyond the elitist class in India. So currently about 8% of India is online, and about half of that, about 4% of India is buying online. Clearly, about 40% of India, maybe even 50% of India can afford to buy some travel product, including a humble, modest train ticket. The challenge for us really is how do we accelerate that growth, and how do we grow from our 4% pie to our 40 or 50% pie? And when I say we, I mean the online travel industry.
Any suggestions on how you do that?
Yeah, I think we have some pretty interesting ideas, and again, some of them Amitabh alluded to. Clearly, the form factor is going to be a big one. The form factor, and Amitabh showed his phone, and then there's some other very exciting form factors, and you have stuff like this, which is super light, and everyone knows obviously the iPad 2.
This comes under the rubric of showing off that he's got one before I have.
Absolutely, bragging rights. I got a day
bragging
before.
Rights.
Bragging rights. The iPad 2 is not easy to get when you're in India. It takes a bit. But no, the point I'm trying to make out here is not really the iPad kind of form factors. I'm actually talking about the form factors which people are familiar with in India and US. And this is more like names which may not mean much to you, but names like Olive, names like Lava, names like Micromax. These are cheap at 1/4 or 1/5 the price of the Dell Streak or of the iPhone, but they do pretty much everything. And they're online, and 3G has been launched. So you really have a veritable computer in your hand, ready to search and book wherever you go.
You've taken me nicely. You'd have almost thought this was planned in this way. I would wish that it were, into technology. The phone gives, according to our gentleman here, the phone gives you a computer in your hand, which then opens up this vast arena of technology into the distribution channel.
Michael?
Are you sweet?
So, can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
So I think that here in this part of the world, the mobile device is actually the key way that folks access the internet. So, for example, here in China, 62% or 63% of access to the internet is via a handheld device. So that in itself brings in a huge opportunity for travel organizations to access people remotely through these devices. The area that I'm particularly interested in is the area of social media and the impact of social media on the buying patterns, on the ways that perceptions are changed and modified about destinations airlines. So that's where my interest is. And if I can access my Facebook or my Twitter or my Renren or my Weibo, then I'm going to have a greater propensity to share my experiences and in turn mold the perceptions of others in that social environment.
Let's just pause there. You're nodding.
Absolutely. I think that's the next generation Web 3.0, where you move from social media into social shopping. And I think it will really radically reshape the distribution landscape.
Do you care, other than in an ego sense, do you care about what is said about your airline in a social media context?
Absolutely, without doubt.
Even though, potentially, as indeed some of the European, and forgive me, let's face it, Ryanair is hardly Europe's most loved airline in terms of social media comment, but it is still Europe's largest airline. So, one questions whether the mere fact somebody beats you up in social media makes a difference if the price is right.
Absolutely it does, but what's key is to be able to filter it and know you can't deal with 100% of all the issues, but you need to understand where are the trends, where are the clusters, and address the most important topics.
Sir.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You made an interesting point.
Sorry,
Richard, first of all, I feel like I'm in a choir because I have some panelists behind me, which is the first time I've ever been on a panel where so someone's talking behind me. But what I wanted to highlight was the internet or technology helps consumers make better decisions, that's for sure. And increases transparency, communication, real-time decision-making. And what Azrin's talking about with price, normally, if you don't have transparent information, you're probably very upset when Timothy O'Leary from Ryan Airlines tries to, Tim, right, O'Leary, tries to do something that really bothers you as a consumer. However, with technology now, you could actually make offsets. You could actually make those trade-offs. Maybe customer service isn't good. Maybe he's trying to squeeze some extra margin out of you. However, you have all the information as a consumer now, and you can make that decision for yourself. So consumers have the power to make decisions.
Interesting. You might just bring your microphone just a little bit higher up your tie. Consumers have all the information to make those decisions. Are consumers, from your experience, do they have the wherewithal to make those decisions?
The type of people that are traveling, yeah, people who travel by definition tend to be obviously slightly higher income, therefore tend to be better educated, and the use of things such as the internet, etc., is actually extremely high. Again, don't dismiss the older populations. You take the UK, it now has the highest penetration of internet per household in the world. And those people have got money to spend, they know what's happening because they know how to use the internet well, and they can do their buying decisions very, very effectively. So you've got this huge market becoming available through the internet.
I think, for time immemorial, people have been relying very heavily on word of mouth. And also, if people were unhappy about something, then they wrote a letter to the newspaper and they hoped that it would get published. All that social media has really done is amplified it 1,000 or 1,000,000 times and accelerated the speed and the power of what you can do. So it's really, really, really important. It gives you a pulse of what your customers are saying. So I agree with Azran completely. It actually gives you a pulse of where you're trending, where you're going, and maybe Ryanair can afford to do what they're doing. But I think for a new brand being built out in Asia, reputation is critical.
Yes?
The thing that's interesting is people think that social media is a linear type of platform, whereas one comment or one opinion here impacts linearly at the same point. What we're finding by doing analysis on the Japanese earthquake situation is that certain populations on the social media have a very different perception about what's happening. So, for example, in North America, the Japan's closed scenario has basically come about because the media has picked up and emphasized certain things, which is then amplified within the media, within social networks, within that demographic. However, in other parts of the world that have been more sympathetic perhaps to reporting in a different way, there's a completely different mindset. And that mindset is propagated and amplified because the platforms are different. Because Facebook, for example, is a very popular social media platform in one part of the world, but as most of you probably recognize, it doesn't even have relevance in China. So if something is happening on Facebook today, then folks in this room probably won't see it. And the same with Twitter, and the same with YouTube. So the different types of social platforms will amplify messages differently and at different rates and in different ways. And I think that's why we like to look at social intelligence and understand those patterns. And for folks in airlines and hospitality, understand from those patterns what can be used and what can't be used.
You're nodding.
I mean, I would completely agree with what Matt talked about, although I would highlight that this is still early days. And just like, if you think about it, in 1950, the first television commercial that someone saw was probably pretty effective. If you think about it, wow, I saw it, I'm going to buy Ivory soap or whatever P&G was flogging at the time. Now what we see, I mean, we are inundated with information. And what happens is consumers have a healthy sense of skepticism in the decisions they make, in the information they take. So very valuable, however, consumers are putting things within context very quickly.
One point though, in terms of trust.
Sorry.
So the interesting thing with social media research and the fact that there's a trust perception. So here in China, for example, there's a 2-to-1 factor of trust. So people in China on social media tend to trust what people say to them in social media. So there's almost a different type of connection that we have on a social media basis to what I have from the traditional media such as press, TV or print. So when marketers start to understand the importance, the significance of building a trust with somebody via social media, then it becomes a very important way of propagating information and understanding.
Let's take that point on trust and the way in which social media is used. Do you think there's a difference demographically in the way social media is applied from what you're seeing?
I'm not the expert on social media, so I don't know how to answer.
No, but okay, then on the demographics of spend. Let's turn to Boeing for a second. Does social media have any impact, in a sense, into your company? And I'm thinking about, let's face it, does it matter what people are saying about your planes on social media?
What do you mean by that?
That's it, they don't buy your planes, do they?
Well, of course it matters because it's the traveling public that we all care about. So if you think about what we've been talking about, last year 2.6 billion people flew on airplanes. 2.6 billion. This is the safest form of travel in the world. You know, there was an accident for 1.6 million flights. Probability of you hurting yourself walking in the lobby of the hotel is much higher than it is on an airplane. And if you think about the growth we've been talking about and the technology, you have to get the people through the airports.
Right.
You have to get them through the sky safely. So if you think of the most important aspect, safety and security. So we need to make it much easier for the passengers to come through the system where it is very safe. And the technologies associated with social media is one of the important aspects as you try to think of the future as how do we allow people to fly through the system with these great volumes where it is still, in this global world, a safe place.
You know, one area where I think social media will have a big context in aviation and aircraft manufacturing is the issue of the fuel efficiency and carbon footprints of aircraft, because that will become a bigger issue, especially in the context of sustainable tourism. And people want to know, you know, when they fly a different airline, a different type of aircraft, it has a big difference. Absolutely.
Does anybody care? I mean, they care in some abstract way, surely. Well, they care in some abstract way until they have, but I don't know, does anybody saying, I'm going to fly X or Y because they have a lower carbon footprint?
When it starts becoming priced into it, especially with the ETS coming in the short term.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that, and I can tell you for a fact that people care. On our website.
In an abstract sense?
No, for a fact. I need 60 seconds.
You've got them. I'm counting.
Okay, on our website, when you book an air ticket, you actually have a choice when you're doing checkout to pay for carbon offset. So basically, you can choose to pay 25 rupees per tree sapling to be planted, which will help offset the carbon credit, the carbon footprint that flight will cause. And guess what? 2.5% of customers are paying the extra money of 10,000 customers buying airline tickets a day on our site.
How many percent?
2.5% already.
That's nothing.
This was launched 3 months ago.
2.5%?
2.5% of Indians are paying, and this was launched 3 months ago. I think it's fantastic, and it's growing. It was 0 3 months ago. And I will report back.
All right, on that basis, the statisticians would improve.
Well, they don't need to, right? This is not a guilt association thing. They don't need to pay that extra amount, but they're paying $1 plus to get a couple of saplings being planted in a desert in Rajasthan, which will help offset it. It's not necessarily cool. You'll do it once and you'll talk about it like the iPad 2. And you say it's a cool thing to do. This is something people are doing because, like Azran said, people have started to care.
As a marketer, I think as a marketer, I would find CSR type activities interesting to market. Yet, I think as a number, as a percentage, the jury is still out, right? You need to see where, you know, in 6 months' time or a year's time.
Yeah. PATA next year, 61st anniversary.
Right. What about in China, sir? In China, how concerned are this vast and growing number of travelers about issues relating to the environment and sustainability of travel? Has this message permeated down to the individual traveler, or is it still something that people talk about but don't act upon?
应该说，随着旅游的发展，现在中国人对环境保护的理念越来越深入。中国的这个出游的人数很多，现在旅游方式也在改变，保护的意识也在增强，人们越来越注意到保护环境、低碳旅游、生态旅游。
Don't forget, we are just at the start of a $100 oil scenario. This is not just another blip like 2008. This is the new reality, and it does change the game.
Right. I just need to ask, how many people in here have ticked carbon offset when they travel on a regular basis? Well, there's somebody over there.
A little more than 2.5%.
Well, hang on. How many? Put your hands up properly. We've got one lady. Where's the second? Oh, Anita. A 3. Give him a round of applause. Yes, sir.
I think a question I have is, I mean, should it be voluntary or should it be mandatory? I mean, I think that's an interesting question.
Would you like to ask that?
Yeah, I would like to ask that question. Does the audience think it should be voluntary, which is 2.5%?
All right, all those in favor of mandatory carbon offsetting payments, put your hand up. Properly put your hand up. I can't wave your hand so we can get a better idea.
Yeah.
All those in favor of voluntary, put your hand up. I think the voluntaries have it. Are you surprised?
Well, you know, I don't think that bodes well for the environmental movement, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
Sorry? It's a dumb way to solve the problem. Planting trees is a dumb way to solve the problem. Come along, sir. It's time for you to get yourself active.
So Richard.
Hang on a second. One second. Let's just hear from him first, and then we'll hear from you. We're in trouble now. Go on. Who are you?
Doug. Doug.
Hello, Doug. What's your point?
The do I need this?
Yes, you do.
The significance of the issue is diminished when you trivialize the solution. Carbon offsets by airlines addressing climate change is like a Band-Aid on cancer.
Well, if we're going to adopt that strategy, the best answer is not to travel at all and use video conferencing and put you all out of business.
Well, that is a part of the solution, and so is a carbon tax.
A carbon tax?
Introduce it into the price structure.
Oh boy, we've gone nuclear, sir.
So I think it's important that we understand that the industry is doing something about it. From the Boeing perspective, roughly around 75% of our R&D dollars goes towards some form of environmental improvement. Because remember, it's all about taking weight out of airplanes.
Right.
If you think of the goal that we've got to be carbon neutral growth by 2020 and to have by 2050 to be 50% less than 2005 levels. So what are we doing about it? So such as green engines.
Right.
We're doing something about it. Cleaning the engines, we're doing something about it. The new concepts for air traffic management, we're doing something about it. Think of like continuous descent approach, where what we actually do is 60 minutes before arrival, we, through communication, arrange that roughly about 100 kilometers out, that the airplane goes to idle, and then we idle in, and we save up to around 15 to 20%. So the problem is being addressed from an industry perspective, and it's not about taxes. It's about actually putting technology to work for the benefit of mankind.
Okay. Would you agree with me that the industry, the aviation industry, the airline industry particularly, has done a truly shocking job at getting over the message that actually aviation and airlines are a very small part of the problem?
Yes, but we mustn't, like, as we said, like trivialize it. We contribute 2%.
Less than 2%.
Less than 2%, and it is growing. But the point is that everybody has to do something about it, and we are actively spending billions of dollars to do something about it.
Demographics, do people care? Do people care other than in a academic, dinner party, chattering classes way?
My answer is that they care in the latter sense, the chattering area, because if they really cared, they wouldn't travel right now. Oops. Ooh. Sorry, it's quite hard up the front here.
Yeah, that was the chattering classes giving their response.
If they really cared, they wouldn't travel, but in actual fact, people are traveling more and more all the time. So if it was seen as a major issue, they would have changed their behavior by now.
Yeah, I agree with Clint. People care more especially here at the stage of development here in China. People care in their mental sense. If they care too much, they won't travel that much.
Before Jeffrey has a coronary at the back, Jeffrey.
Yes, Richard, thank you. Jeff Lippman from greenearth.travel. I want to agree with the last but one speaker who said that when you're talking about the issue of voluntary or mandatory offsets of passengers, it's such a small component of the total challenge that there is to go to a regime where we are lowering the Earth's temperature or not increasing it by more than 2% by 2050. It's a non-question. You might as well ask people how many people want to pay taxes. Nobody has any place in that big game. The big game is that the whole of society has to change, and we're 5% for tourism, 2% for aviation, and cities are creating 60%, and deforestation is creating 25%. So to the last speaker, we don't have a serious problem, and yes, we haven't got our message across, and the media hasn't been particularly helpful.
Oh,
because Richard...
if in doubt, Jeffrey, if in doubt, blame the media.
No. You are very happy to jump on the message that says aviation is the problem without getting to the serious issues that have been put out by the guy from Boeing and other people. We've all got a problem. It's society, and aviation is one of the solutions, not one of the problems.
If it was one of the solutions, Jeffrey, and I ask this back to Boeing, then your direct descent and all your various measures that are being taken would be introduced a lot quicker than they're actually being introduced. You've been testing some of these things for many years, but whether it's ICAO, whether it's ATC, whether it's Eurocontrol, whether it's America's spend on new ATC mechanisms and satellite guidance, none of it's really happening at any great speed.
But you can't play games
Not to you,
with
Jeffrey,
aeroplanes,
to Boeing.
Aeroplanes
Thank
are
you, Jeffrey.
instruments.
Yes, sir.
Yes, it is happening, and it's slow, but it is happening. Same as liberalization is happening in the United States. The number of regulatory agencies are all working together to standardize. Europe, Asia is. So slowly, the world is globalizing.
Another question from our audience. Anybody got a question? Yes, sir.
Well, it's me again, Richard.
Oh.
Richard, why do you keep ignoring the reality to say the things
I'm
that
not
you want
ignoring
to
the reality,
say?
I'm ignoring you.
That's true. You can't play games with aeroplanes and say you should do it faster because it's safety and it's people's lives, and these changes are very complicated to undertake. Biofuel is a huge issue, but you don't just change fuel in mid-flight on an aeroplane unless you're talking on TV.
No, Jeffrey. No, Jeffrey, but what you also don't do, and we'll bring this to a close and move back to our discussion, what you also don't do, Jeffrey, is you don't bleat about it for many years, allow it to become bogged down in regulatory issues, and don't make significant progress over a period of time.
I agree with you, Richard,
Thank you.
for once in my life.
Thank you. Now we'll move on back to technology. Sir, how far is technology still got to come to move forward? How much more have we still got to do to gain the benefits from it in this industry? And what do we need to do?
Yeah, Richard, I think that's an interesting question. When I was in Silicon Valley a number of years ago, a lot of the venture capitalists I talked to felt that, well, everything is over. And this is before Google started. Everything is over. And all of a sudden, Google started, and obviously they're one of the greatest success stories of the last few years. And then a few years ago, when Facebook launched, everyone also thought it was over, meaning there is always something new that's coming. And even in China, we have companies like a company called Caixin or Renren. These are companies that were nothing 3-4 years ago, and now they're some of the largest companies offering great products and services to consumers. So I think one of the key aspects of technology is change.
What problem, since we're looking to the future, what problem still remains to be solved by technology in that sense?
So if I could answer that, sorry for butting in deep. Fundamentally, a technology is just a tool for something else. And for us, and I think for Matt as well, Deep, is we help consumers make better decisions. We offer greater choices to to help them find better travel products, go to places they want to go to, maybe they never even thought they wanted to go to, travel with different types of people. Technology, especially information technology, allows all that to happen.
But what Gordian knot still hasn't been cut by technology, or maybe we don't even realize it yet?
You know what? I guess I'm not going to tell you. It's a secret. No, I don't. That's a great question, but
you do know.
This is a process of innovation. Like Chairman Deng Xiaoping used to say that you have to feel the stones crossing the river. What we're doing is we're muddling along, trying to understand how consumers are thinking and doing things differently. It's definitely not top down, it's bottom up.
Yeah, also, Richard,
Hang on, we'll come to you and then to you. Yes, sir.
One of the big trends that's happening, which he is addressing, is half the world's spend on recreation is from households over $100,000 US. Those people have traveled a lot. They're looking for new types of travel. They don't want to see the Eiffel Tower again. They want to find out new things, new experiences, new adventures, and technology lets those people scan the world and work out the holiday they want, what airline they want to go in, what hotel, what type of accommodation, a lot. Sorry.
There's a point on this, though. Have you now got two groups? You've got the groups of people who don't want to see the Eiffel Tower again, but India and China have got a large number of people who have not seen the Eiffel Tower except on a postcard.
Exactly. You've actually got three markets emerging. You've got the affluent older, who are going to have longer lifespans and also work to age 70, so it's growing. You've got the older middle-income Chinese, which is a huge growth market, but over 40, no kids, want a bit more, tick-a-box holiday. And then you've got the poor young families who are starting looking for family-type holidays. And you've got three dimensions to that market.
Yeah, I think the problem which remains to be solved is really the one of a customized, bespoke solution, which we all believe, I think, that a human being does much better for us today. I think you alluded to that, and I think Fritz talked about that, which is, I've been to Paris 3 times, but I do want to go the 4th time, but I want to do something very different, or I want to go to the south of France. So you'll get all the choices online. TripAdvisor will tell you perhaps which hotels to stay in, which hotels stink, which hotels are great, etc., etc. But who's going to tie it all together for those 7 precious days that you've got? I don't think technology has solved that yet. We're probably halfway there, but that's a tough one. It's not easy.
For the vast majority, can technology ever solve that problem? Isn't that where your bespoke, premium, pay a bit more travel agent is going to come along?
I think this is an interesting area, and I think technology is certainly addressing different parts of it. I think one of the trends that we're going to see is buying.
Just let me get you another microphone. Have you got a hand microphone? Somebody give me a hand microphone, because we're having obviously a few more problems with your mic, and I do want to hear what you're saying. There we are. Why don't you have that one just for the moment?
So I think what's interesting to me, and looking at technology, certainly in the area of tourism, is the fact that technology is changing patterns of behaviour. Not only is it changing where I'm going to go to because I have more information about the options available, it's changing about how I engage that information, and through that, buying technology. So I foresee that social commerce, m-commerce, all of these are new areas of innovation that we'll see in our industry over the next 12 to 24 months. So, for example, where we've seen the phenomena of Groupon in the US, where groups of people can come together for a period of time and get discount, we will start to see things like this occurring in our industry. So hotels, for example, will adopt time-based purchasing. And if we take that forward and use socially moderated or socially mediated group-based buying, these types of platforms will become the enablers of our area in the next 24 months.
What would you like to see more from technology? Because you're able to sell me the ticket, sell me insurance, sell me bags in the hold, sell me this, that, and the other. But can you go to the next stage with what? And if you did, what would that be?
Look, we want to move beyond being an airline brand, a transportation brand. It's all about being a lifestyle brand.
I always get very worried when someone uses the word lifestyle brand.
You can say that, but it's about having a direct relationship with the customer, having a continuous engagement throughout the process. It's not just about going from point A to point B.
How do you execute that with technology?
Making it personalized. You have a history, a relationship with a person. You know that how they fit into what their social interests are, you know, and you become a lot more relevant to them with tailored offerings.
Also,
are we going to have Air Asia fizzy drinks then? Or,
I'm sorry?
Are we going to have Air Asia fizzy drinks? Or
Sorry?
Air Asia fizzy drinks.
We already have that for the Lotus fizzy drinks.
What wouldn't you? I always love this one. What wouldn't you brand?
Can't say anything that I wouldn't consider. You know, we're already selling concert tickets, football tickets, you know. Doing space travel, I suppose.
But also, I mean, you should also appreciate technology is going to play a big role in delivery with the whole concept of robotics. That more and more of the delivery system can be done by machines. I stayed in a hotel in Japan about 2 months ago where I didn't deal with a single person the entire stay. Even the check-in was just done with a credit card in a machine. Exit was done that way.
Did you enjoy
Very
that
efficient.
experience?
It was efficient.
Sorry?
It was efficient.
Well, I didn't ask you whether it was efficient. I said, did you enjoy it? Because let's face it.
It was a business trip. My wife won't allow me to enjoy myself on business trips.
Let's face it. Isn't that the exact opposite of what we were hearing about with the Ritz-Carltons, the Four Seasons selling you?
Well, perhaps people are becoming more careful about how they spend their money and want better value.
Any questions that we'd like to hear from you? Yes, Anita. Yeah.
Regret.
Great, Richard, thank you very much. A question to the entire panel, actually, because we
Way
talk
up.
about progressive in a 20 years on, 50 years on, but I want to talk about progressive right now. One of the issues we found last year is that on event after event after event, tens of thousands of passengers were stranded in airports and in destinations around the world. An ash cloud, storms over Heathrow in the whole European area over Christmas. It then moved to New York. And we talk about progression, but when we really talk about responsible travel, we're responsible for taking care of the traveler. And when things went wrong, everyone backed out. Tour operators would not take care of the travelers. It wasn't their responsibility. It wasn't the hotels, it wasn't the airports, it wasn't the airlines. So people were bulks, effectively sleeping in airports around the world for periods of 3, 5, 7 days, and millions were stranded. How do we take care of travelers now, collectively and progressively, and still deal with 50 years from now? Because now is what matters right now when you're grounded in Heathrow for 5 days.
All right, let me ask you, though, quickly. Whose responsibility do you think it should be, Anita, before we ask the panel? Isn't this just one of the natural vicissitudes of life? Putting it crudely, shit happens.
Poetically said. It's collective.
Sorry, translators.
Sorry. It's collective, and that's a safe answer, and I apologize for that. But technology has a role in communicating the information that people need through the members of the distribution systems. Airlines have a role. The institutions of WTTC and UNWTO have a role. But for the stranded people who are excited to travel, someone has to stand up and say, we will take care of you.
Why?
Why not? Because we're investing. If they've put their money...
Okay, pause. Well, let's start with you, Asram. We'll come back to you for your thought. Asram, who do you consider it your responsibility?
To an extent, yes.
Where's the line drawn for you?
We have to make sure that everybody has a way of getting back home. As soon as the skies are open, we bring everyone back home.
Right. EU 261 obviously not applying in the case for yourself.
No, but we still take on that responsibility.
What about care and comfort on the ground while they're there? Hotel reservations, foods, and all that sort of stuff during delays?
Be honest. Because I mean, if they stayed in a hotel that we were a part of, probably, but you know, we don't know where they're staying, which hotels. But as soon as they get in touch with us, we make sure they know when they can get home.
Getting them home.
Getting them home.
The World Meteorological Association, as an example, is working with ICAO to establish new standards so that we can be in a positioned to ensure that it is safe flying. They're putting in new weather systems so that we will be able to accurately more map these.
Well, I certainly think social media plays an important part. And, you know, one of the things that we saw in all of these events was how quick people at airports who were stranded got on their phones and started telling the world about how uncomfortable it was. So I certainly think that as a distribution medium, social media played a huge part of that.
Who do you think here, anyone do any thoughts about where the responsibility lies in these crises for paying and looking after the traveller? Anybody got any thoughts on that?
Richard.
Oh, I beg your pardon, sir.
Yeah. What about insurance? I mean, there's no way that every airline can factor in this particular cost. There's no way the OTA can take a responsibility beyond communication. Social media can play a part. But I think, you know, the whole idea of taking insurance, I know that there are clauses that are excluded from insurance contracts. But, okay. I mean, maybe we just need to look at things differently. If you're going to be stranded in an airport, there's a different kind of insurance. I mean, you've got to play on actuarial numbers on this to make it happen.
Sir.
I think it's a very good topic. And I think in some way, the destinations must coordinate some energies. What I mean is, if you ask each of different segments who are responsible, it's quite difficult for one carrier or travel agency's operator, even the insurance, to take the responsibility by itself. Right? So what I propose, seriously, at the level of the different destinations, we must be informed that it's a must to take care of our tourists. I give you an example that a very small scale, but during the last Christmas in Heathrow, we have 150 students from Macau stranded in the airport. We could resolve the problem because the carriers, right. Some operators, we could cooperate, but nobody is prepared in advance. What I mean is we need to create this information that we need to be prepared. Don't wait for the disaster to react.
How many of you in this room thinks ultimately it is the traveller's responsibility to make some preparation for themselves? How many on the panel?
Oh, I do.
Sorry?
I think I was making a half comment there.
You were sitting on the fence.
Yeah, no, I was on the fence, but I think it's important to note that, you know, that the really great brands and the really great market-driven companies right. are really trying to meet customer needs. And to give you an example, I mean, this is my competitor, but they do a phenomenal job. You know, Ctrip.com, which is a Chinese company. So when they sell packages to Europe, they man a 24-hour, 7 days a week call center, just waiting in case there's a problem with if those travelers, because a lot of them don't speak English. And what they'll do is, even if the food is horrible on the tour, or it doesn't have to be the Iceland volcano, it could be something small. And this is what great brands do, is they actually try to meet the needs of customers, and they actually charge a premium. They're more profitable than companies like Expedia and Priceline and some of the other, you know, well-known travel brands, and so they're able to do it. They're using market forces, meeting customers, forgetting about who's legally responsible. Right. You know, that's one issue. And then there's another thing is, from your brand point of view, you know, who's really responsible. And great companies focus on that. Cathay Pacific does the same thing. I remember in the Philippines when they had that shootout, and there was a number of people from Hong Kong, and Cathay chartered a flight, flew it to the Philippines to get those Hong Kong residents out. I mean, this is what they did. I mean, and great companies do that.
We're coming to the end. I want to go down our panel one at a time. We'll start with you, sir, in the middle, on what is the one message, and this is the same question to all of you, what is the one message that you would like us to take away today as we think about the future of this industry? To you, sir. Sorry. The one thing that you would like us to think about for the future.
对未来最着重的一点，应该是善行旅游，应该是善行旅游，因为善行旅游是一个新概念，是在生态旅游、低碳旅游、绿色旅游的基础上提出一个全新的概念。我觉得善行旅游，正如刚才有一先生在提问的时候谈到的，需要各个相关利益者的通力合作。中国黄山风景区在善行旅游上有一些很好的经验和做法，做了一些探索。我觉得未来最重要的还是要积极的践行善行旅游。
Let's take that and we'll throw it to you, sir.
The global village and its essence, the global air transportation system is becoming smart in all the various parts, and it all needs to work together for the future.
Working together for the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think it's going to be a far more collaborative world. It's gone are the days where it was OTA versus GDS versus meta search versus suppliers. I think we've all got to work together with keeping only one thing in mind and one thing at the center of our focus, which is the customer, and you'll get the right solution. I mean, we're going to see a lot of change. I think change and nimbleness is going to be the name of the game for people to succeed. Moore's law is very true in our industry. Things are changing faster exponentially than they ever were, and it's only the fleet-footed who are going to survive.
And you don't agree?
I completely disagree with that. I think in the age of disruption and discontinuity, the biggest danger is groupthink. Is groupthink when you start expecting that, for example, governments, multilateral organizations, even industry associations to be at the forefront of thinking, because somehow it averages down. You dumb down when you think in a group. You know, you've got to be out there different, and you've got to exploit these discontinuities. You can't wait for others to hold you back.
Well, what I would say is just, read the front page of the New York Times on any given day, and what you'll see is every issue we face, it reminds us, every issue we face in this industry, the environment, fuel costs, terrorism, demographic issues, technology, almost every single article on the front page of the New York Times has something very important to our industry. And just read it, and it'll remind us of something important.
Okay, so I want to talk to the PARTA members and just bring you awareness about social media and the impact to the person running the boutique motel, the airline, the hotel, the destination. Social media impacts at every level to every one of the PARTA members here. And social media can be your friend or it can be your foe. And I think that's the message I want you to take away from today.
From my perspective, I would give the industry people a recommendation. That is, Chinese people, tourists are coming and are coming more because over the past 5 years, almost doubled the Chinese people going overseas in terms of number. And also, Chinese tourists are spreading out other than Asia Pacific. 5 years ago, about 90% of the Chinese tourists came to Hong Kong and Macau. But now that percentage down to 70%. Now more people are going to Europe, and more we see rich individual people going to Africa and Latin America. And also another phenomenon needs to be observed by the industry people. That is, people tend to use more credit cards over debit cards and over cash when they travel, especially for the people going to other parts of the continents.
Leaving the last word to you, sir, because you've got the numbers of who's going where and why we're going.
Quite simple, really. I think it's good news for you. The number of potential tourists is going to continue to increase. Obviously, it's going to expand in terms of origin. but also they're going to be better educated and more affluent over time. Those are just normal things. So the types of offerings that you can make to these people is going to become more and more interesting, perhaps more profitable for you.
On that note, there are going to be more people traveling, they're going to be better educated, and they're going to be more affluent. Now, if that isn't a recipe for success, only you can screw it up. Thank you.
Good comment. Oh, thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to ask Mr. Amitabh Kant back on stage. We enjoyed being part of a very lively and interesting discussion. Please join me in thanking our lead presenter, Mr. Amitabh Kant, all of our panelists, Mr. Fritz Demopoulos, Mr. Jiwei Ju, Mr. Matthew McDougall, Mr. Deep Kara, Mr. Michael Maple, Mr. Dong Li, Mr. Asran Osman Rani, and last but not least, our wonderful moderator, Mr. Richard Quest. And now it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Hiran Kure, the PATA chairman, on stage to hand over a token of appreciation. Hiran Kure.